Welcome back. Following Elon Musk's interview with former President Trump on X, we're taking a look at the risks and rewards for Musk's portfolio of companies. Let's bring in Tim Higgins, the Wall Street Journal business columnist and a CNBC contributor whose columns are always so fantastic when it comes to looking at what Elon is thinking at any given moment. Tim, what did you make of last night, especially as it relates to Elon and what we might have learned about his own political views or his views of Trump?
Yeah, you could kind of, for the first time, kind of hear him interacting with the president to see how his worldviews align. A lot of the things they said, we already knew. We already know where Trump stands on a whole host of issues. And because of X and because of Elon's huge use of that platform, we already know his political views on a lot of these things. But it was interesting to hear him talk about immigration, talk about regulatory reforms that he wants, talk about a whole host of other issues with the former president in a way to see how they might align. Sometimes they seemed in full agreement. Sometimes it seemed like maybe they were just talking past each other in kind of sort of agreement.
And how much of a risk is this for Elon Musk? You know, he mentioned on the discussion last night that he had been at one point a sort of moderate liberal or moderate left, and now he's, you know, not just endorsing the president, but probably contributing a lot to his campaign. And now this. Why do you think he's taking such a big bet on President Trump, given that we now have a very close race?
Well, the risks were just evident in the day. Just hours before the event, the European Union sending a letter warning him that the potential of violating their online content laws with this event, the idea that perhaps X could face some sort of a fine if he was to violate those laws, just an indication of the kind of the scrutiny he's under there. We see that Tesla customers, where he's the CEO, or some of them are concerned. Of course, maybe some of them are turned on by his activities, but it throws kind of more uncertainty into that business. And then also we saw just in his kind of full endorsement of Trump and the comments against the vice president, if she is elected, yet again, he's going to have a political enemy in the White House if she is elected.
And they also have, in some ways, overlapping demographics. I mean, one of the key voter groups that former President Trump is targeting is young men, say men under 30. To what degree does the Musk audience that came last night and that follows him, could that help Trump? Could that be transferred to Trump as voters?
Right. Going into last night, you probably weren't getting moderate voters or people who were not already having a decision of what they believe in Trump or what they think in Elon. You remember, the event started 45 minutes later, so you really wanted to hear what the former president had to say. Now, of course, there's the opportunity for virality of these clips that will go ahead and occur today. But if you wanted to hear it live, you were kind of already committed to the camp. So what, in a lot of ways, the benefit is kind of revitalizing that base, turning on Elon's supporters, that what I call the echoverse of almost 200 million people that follow him, and kind of reminding them that to get into the game, to be excited for this candidate that now is back on the platform for really the first time in a while. And in the meme war, returns to kind of the original home of that kind of virality that made Trump so popular to begin with.
And do you think this ultimately helps X? I mean, X is not having a great time right now as a business. If you look at users, if you look at advertising, does this move the needle for them? Or do you think it hurts them in terms of advocating for one side and being political?
Well, if you look at the third-party data, clearly users, it's not as big as it once was before Elon took over, though I'm sure X would dispute that. They say they're seeing growth. But even the third-party data shows spike in user interest, downloading that app during some of these big political moments, whether it was after the first debate, after the failed assassination attempt. So people have this kind of hardwire habit of turning to the app during big communal moments. And the trick for Elon, the trick for X, is getting people to stick around to see stuff that they want to make as a daily habit. And so, having people come there for a big event is helpful.